We are going to be preparing 4 financial statements, 3 of them in this chapter. But financial statements are our primary means of communicating information to people outside the company. They are not perfect. They contain some things which are estimates, which aren't completely objective, but they still are our best way of going about it at this point. Financial statements have to follow GAAP. Okay? Those are the rules that we have to follow whenever we prepare our financial statements. We have 4 financial statements. We have an income statement, a retained earnings statement, a balance sheet, and then a statement of cash flows. We will, in this chapter, be preparing the first 3. Income statement, retained earnings, balance sheet. We will not prepare statement of cash flows. Matter of fact, I'm perfectly fine in your book if you just kind of ignore everything right now that says statement of cash flows. Statement of cash flows is our very last chapter in this course. So when it rolls around about December, we're going to be getting into statement of cash flows. It's our most complex, and so we're going to save it all for the end. I really don't even want to talk about it right at this point at all, even though your book may mention it a little bit. Okay. The heading for my financial statements is always the same. The first line is the name of the company. The second line is the name of the statement, income statement, balance sheet, and so forth. And the third line is the date line. There really are 2 possible things that can appear on the date line depending upon what type of statement that it is. We're going to do the income statement first. Okay? The income statement summarizes a company's revenues and expenses during a period of time. Now let's stop right there. You don't know what the word revenues and expenses necessarily mean, but tell me this. Would you rather have a revenue or an expense? A revenue. So you know something about it at least, don't you? This statement will help us to assess how profitable we were during a period of time. In simple terms, did we make money or did we lose money? Okay, is what the income statement will help us to see. Our formula for the income statement is in a little gray box right there on your handout. Do you see that? Would you put a star beside it, and would you turn the corner of that page down because you need to memorize this now? We need to know this when we come back next class. The formula for the income statement is this. Revenues minus expenses equals my net income or net loss. Revenues minus expenses equals net income or net loss. If we have more revenues than we do expenses, the difference between the two we say is our net income. If we have more expenses than we do revenues, the difference would be our net loss. And we put parentheses around that number to show that it's a negative number. Which would you rather have, a net income or a net loss? A net income then. Okay. Here's an example of one. Just wanted to show you a few things about it. Here we got old George's business. Here are George's revenues and here are his expenses. He had 2 revenues. They add up to a total of $700. He had 3 expenses. They add up to $400. He had more revenues than he did expenses, so we say he had a net income instead of a net loss. Now, at this point, I get students sometimes who are bothered by the fact that we have 2 columns for the number. So let's talk about why do we have 2 columns for the numbers? To make it look pretty, to make it easier on the eyes. For example, by putting this 400 directly beneath the 700, we can tell that we have to subtract those 2. All right. What if I were to do it this way? Put all of them in one column. It's kind of confusing, isn't it? It really is confusing. Do you see how that first one was a lot easier to understand what was going on than the second one? Okay. And I'll kind of give you the general rules a little bit about the columns. So don't sweat the columns right now, but realize the only purpose of the columns is to make things look pretty. Easier on the eyes, easier to understand. I give silly tips. I give acronyms. If you need them, great. If you don't, that's fine too. Intelligent students read every night. Income statement, revenues, expenses, net income. I doubt that you really need an acronym for this one, but there will be some later on where we have like some long things to learn that I'll try to come up with acronyms for you then. This one you probably don't really need it for. Okay. Revenues. What do we mean by revenues? Well, revenues are what we earn by doing something. If I'm a barber, how do I earn revenue? Cut hair. If I am a landscaper, how do I earn revenue? Scape land. I like that. Cut grass, all those good things good. If I'm a plumber, how do I earn revenue? Plumb. I get that answer. I love that. I'm not sure that's a real word, but I like it. Okay. If I'm a doctor, how do I earn revenue? Sue patients, help people. All right. If I am a lawyer, sue patient. No. Stick people. Somebody said cut patients in my last class. I'm like, well, that works too, I guess. How about a lawyer? How does a lawyer earn revenue? Okay. Try cases, give legal advice. All right, so I have to do something. I have to perform a service in order to earn revenue. Or sell a product, but we're not going to do that till chapter 5. When we do the work, we earn the revenue. At that moment, when I perform the service, we earn the revenue. Sometimes I get paid in cash right away, but not always. It doesn't matter whether or not I get paid. When I do the work, I've earned the revenue. Revenue is recorded when it is earned. Okay. What if I signed a contract to do some work later on? Have I done the work yet? No. So do I have revenue? No. Sometimes I even get paid in advance. Doesn't happen in my life, but sometimes in certain businesses they get paid in advance. At that moment, they get paid in advance. Have they done the work? No. So do they have revenue? No. So to earn revenue, you have to do some work, perform a service here. Earning revenue makes my business worth more. It makes the net worth of my business go up. There are 3 words that mean revenue. You might want to mark this in your handout because I'm going to use them interchangeably. Revenue, income, and earned all mean the same thing. So if I'm a landlord, for example, I could have an account called rent revenue, or I could call it rent income, or I could call it rent earned. And those all mean the exact same thing. Just because money comes into my business doesn't necessarily mean I've earned revenue. If I go to the bank and borrow $1 million, have I earned revenue? No. All right. If I issue shares of stock and stockholders buy it and give me money, have I earned revenue? No, because I have not performed a service. Expenses are the cost of doing business. Unfortunately, if I want to generate revenue, I'm going to have to incur some expenses. Let's suppose that I am a law office again. Tell me some of the regular, ongoing, recurring expenses you think a law office would have.
Paper.
Okay, supplies. Very good. Yes. What else?
Renting an office.
Rent. You got to have that nice, fancy building. Very good. What else? Electricity. Although those legal offices are always so dim, I think they're saving on their electric bill. I didn't figure that out. How about who really does all the work at the law office? Your paralegals. You better pay them well, okay? You better be paying your secretaries, okay? How about insurance? Do you think that law practice better have some insurance, some errors and omission insurance? Yeah, I bet they better. Those are expenses, the cost of doing business. When we use up goods and services, they become an expense to us. When we use up goods and services, they'll become an expense to us, regardless of when we pay them in cash. We'll come back to that. Incurring expenses, though, makes my net worth go down. Revenues makes it go up. Expenses then makes it go down. Just because cash goes out does not mean I necessarily have an expense. Corporations pay something called dividends to their shareholders. We'll talk about that later on, but that's a way of giving money back to their owners as an incentive for them to buy your stock and keep your stock. Dividends are not an expense to the corporation. Okay? All right, we're going to do a quick example. We've got about 7 minutes, perfect timing here. We should be on page 12 of your handout, I believe. Do you see now where we have some blank spaces? Okay, those are things we're going to fill in class together. We're going to do an income statement for our company here. Notice we have 3 expenses and we have 1 revenue, and we're doing this for the month of April. All right? Let's first off fill in our heading. The first line of the heading is always going to be the company name. If you want to abbreviate, you're welcome to. But anyway, I gave you a long one, but that's the company name first. The second line of the heading is always going to be the name of the statement, which in this case is the income statement. And the third line of the statement is going to be the date line. Now, this statement here covers the month of April. The way we are going to say that is we're going to say for the month ended and give it the last day of the month. For the month ended April 30th in this case. Now, it's not always going to be a month. It might be a year. Okay? So it could be for the year ended December 31st. But in our case, this is for the month ended April 30th. Our income statement. What's the first item that shows up on our income statement? What's our formula? We start with revenues come first, right? All right, let's write the word revenues. And our revenue is specifically called car rental revenue. Now, notice over here, I give you 2 columns for numbers. Do you see that? I want you to put that in the middle column. It's kind of silly. I'll show you why, but in just a minute. Put the 2,000 here, not to the far right, but the next one over. Okay? And since that is my only revenue, after that I'm going to put total revenues and put the total over here to the right. Now, honestly, that's kind of silly. What's silly about total revenues? You only got one, right? Honestly, if you only have one revenue, you can just put it over to the right and skip writing the total completely. I'm just assuming in most cases we're going to have more than one revenue then. Okay? But if you just have one, you can skip writing total, just put the amount over to the right instead. All right, that's revenues. What comes after revenues in my income statement? Expenses. Expenses. We're going to write that word next. And we had 3 different expenses, didn't we? I really don't care what order you list them in. Your textbook will always list them largest to smallest, but they'll always put miscellaneous last. Largest to smallest, but miscellaneous is always last. So if you're trying to match up to the textbook, that's their order. But we have 3 expenses: salary, security, utilities. They all add up then to a total, what, of $1,150? How did we do this month? Did we do pretty good or pretty bad? I think we did great. Now, if those numbers aren't big enough, you can add 6 zeros after any of them. That'll be fine. All right? I think we did great. Why? Because we have more revenues than we do expenses. Therefore, the difference between the two would be called my net income. Net income. And that's going to be my last line here. Let me mention a few words about formatting. I don't want you to get too hung up on that at this time, but I know some students sometimes have questions. The bottom number always gets a $ and a double underline. Okay? $, double underline. Okay? These underlines right here are just like you were in the first grade. If in first grade they told you to add 2 plus 2, you'd write what? 2 and 2, and right after that you draw a line. Okay? So that's why we have a single line right here and also there, but again, that's kind of silly because there's just one. Don't sweat the $signs. Here's the general rule. The first number in a calculation gets a $sign and the others don't. So see, of those 3 numbers right there, the first one gets a $sign, the others don't. How about in that calculation? The first one gets a $sign, this one doesn't. All right, just a minute, I want to talk about your homework for today. All right, we're going to come out pretty easy. The next thing, do you see on the handout where it tells you exercise 1-19? Exercise 1-19. If you pull your book out for just a minute, I want you to see the way the book is structured. If you look at page 30 in your textbook, page 30, you're going to see some practice exercises. Practice exercises. I don't assign practice exercises for homework. You might want to do them, but I don't assign them. I want you to look on, though, to page 33. What starts on page 33? Exercises. We are doing an exercise right now. Exercise 1-19 can be found on what page? Does anybody see it? 37. Page 37, kind of near the middle of the page. After the exercises, you'll see we have problem series A and problem series B, and we will sometimes be doing problem series A problems. So, did anybody buy the working papers? A couple folks? If you would flip in that, I believe it's page 6. I believe it's page 6, where there is a form you can use to do exercise 1-19. Do you see that? Okay. Now, if you don't have the working papers, it's fine. This is one you could do on notebook paper just as easy. There'll be some coming up that'll be a lot easier if you have the working papers, but that's a form that you could use for that.